we don't have access to in books or textbooks. It's also easy for online classes. Many of us take online classes outside of our core classes, and a lot of that information we do at home and it's submitted online at home.
There are also a lot of students that are our personal friends who don't have the opportunity and don't have the access to this high-speed internet at home. For example, a girl that we know in our English class does not have Wi-Fi at her house, and so a lot of the times when she has an essay to write or anything like that, she'll ask her friend if she can go over and do it there, or she'll have to come in and do it on her own free time at the school so that she can use their Wi-Fi and she can use their computers. And so that is something that would be nice to have access to for everybody.
Yeah, that sort of stuff is super important. Oh, I feel really far away. So I know a lot of our assignments and stuff can be online, like our essays and stuff for English. So we have to submit that, you have to send it to him and everything like that, or our teachers. And I know for a fact that our essays have to be printed, and on like our formal type of essays have to be done like that. And Wi-Fi at home is super important too, like, because me and Ari both take online classes through San Juan College, so taking that stuff at home is super important instead of just in class, because we need to have at least 10 hours of stuff a week.
Yeah, so we're very fortunate to have the high-speed internet and everything that we do have, because it does help us succeed as students, for sure.
Like Nanaba said, a lot of our assignments are like computer-based, like PowerPoints maybe, and a lot of the times if you are missing school, our teachers are able to have a website that they can post notes or PowerPoints or just any sort of information on. And so that's really helpful for us to be able to access that if you have been missing a lot of school.
No excuses any longer for not doing
Yeah,
it.
no excuses.
Okay. Yeah, everything that you miss is also online too. So like in school, a lot of our teachers record with our new Hitachi stuff. Like they record their lessons online, and then they'll like post it. So like if you miss that day, you can go online and find the lecture that she did or he did. So.
Okay. The wave of the future in education, huh?
Yeah.
Right. Thank you, girls. Warren Gasper is a community member that lives in the county. He is also a retiree, and so he's going to share with you the value of broadband from his perspective.
Okay, so is it on?
Yeah, just really lean in.
You got to get closer.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. I moved to Cortez 2.5 years ago, and we moved from Denver. And my wife and I were kind of house hunting on the internet. We made arrangements to meet a realtor down here, went on a marathon session, and boiled it down to 3 houses. And she said, "What do you think?" And I said, "I don't care as long as it's got internet." So I called TDS, and I called the telephone company, and I gave them, verified all 3 addresses, and I said to her, "Pick one, I don't care." So we picked one, we bought the house, we moved in. I called the telephone company. By the way, I retired from them. And they couldn't even provide me with a phone, never mind internet. I called TDS, and they said, "No, they don't serve my area." So here I am with a house and no internet. Now, I got lucky in that one of my neighbors was running a Wi-Fi business here, a wireless business, and I was able to get service from him, albeit it was very expensive. I left 100 megabits per second, and I got 3 when I got here. Now, thanks to the wonderful services of Zoomacom, I at least have real broadband. I now have 25 megabits down and 5 megabits up, and I can tell you it's the best service I've had in a long time. I run a home business. I'm a consultant. I work on networks and computer support for other people, and of course it's all my friends and family. And I live on the internet even though I'm still retired. So without it, I would seriously have to think about leaving town. But you know, once you buy a house here, it's kind of hard to sell it. So we really just need the internet. It's what makes the world go around. So that's my story.
Thanks. All right, are we queued up to be able to?
We hope. It's our best shot.
Okay. Do you guys need to leave now? You don't watch this? I think I find this interesting. This is produced by the Colorado Communications and Utility Association.
Yeah, the irony of having it. Yeah.
Exactly. If you click the unmute button, see if you go over. Yeah, there you go.
Okay.
Colorado is always mentioned at or near the top.
Yeah, the irony is killing me right now.
Providing the talent and skill needed for successful business ventures. Leaders in Colorado
Yeah.
work internationally for high-paying jobs of all kinds. But for many living in Colorado, it's simply
Okay,
Can
well,
we-
Your Honor, let's because our IT guy is back there, he's still
Okay.
working on it, so if we could just move on with our presenters and maybe
All right.
try it in a little bit.
Okay. Well, you're certainly welcome to. I'll try to bring it up as soon as possible. All right, well, thank you, guys. All right, so we're moving on to Plan B. If I could have Kent Rogers and Cheryl Bean, Carol Glover, and Lou Singer, Jason Strickland, and Juan Diego, if you guys would come up, please. Such surprise on your face up there.
Shane, look at that face.
Yeah, let's put it on.
That's a perfect spot to call it. Would you like me to move on?
Please, yeah, get on something.
I can move down here.
No, we'll try here.
Will that work? Thank you.
Colorado is always mentioned at or near the top of any list when it comes to providing the talent and skill needed for successful.
Okay. Well, the first step for this go-round, can you hear me on this mic? Can you hear? Okay. Kent Rogers is the CEO for Southwest Memorial Hospital, and he's gonna share with you some of the new things that are, well, and not so new things, that are coming down the pike that are really dependent upon broadband. So we're...
I snuck over here, Mayor.
Oh, there you are.
I was hoping you wouldn't see me. Good evening. I'm Kent Rogers. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Southwest Health System, and glad to be here tonight just to share a few thoughts. Tell you first of all that I'm a user of technology, not a designer of it. I'm not necessarily technically proficient. There are times where I have to call on my 16-year-old to help me figure out something on this. Some of you can relate to that, right? Let me kind of tell you what's going on in healthcare and what broadband and connectivity means for us. First of all, I'll tell you that the majority, essentially all of acute care providers in the Cortez market are connected electronically through broadband. We share information, clinical information, on at least one, and in some cases, two different platforms. And I don't want to go into all the details around that because it'd take a long time. Obviously, the transmitting speed is of primary importance as we're sharing lots of time images and also discrete data from one location to the next. It's kind of important because it's clinical information about stuff that's going on with you and a diagnosis or a treatment plan coming from your provider. Currently, Southwest Health System runs on a platform that's based out of Kansas City, and it's operated by a company called Cerner, and that's what we call a remote hosting arrangement. That's very common in industry these days, where the actual software is running on boxes with the blinking lights and all that stuff in Kansas City. And we have backup systems here, so we're storing that data locally. but our ability to process clinical information depends a lot on that transmission speed between here and there. And it doesn't really matter if that's in another state, in another country, on another continent, or across the street from us. It all depends on the transmitting speed for that. I'll just tell you a quick personal story. I blew out my knee a couple of weeks ago, and so I was in seeing one of our orthopods, and I had an MRI done. And I was looking at the resolution right across the hall from the MRI, that big donut that you hate to go through. And the resolution was incredible. I went downtown running the very same PACS system, which is an archiving and picture system, and the resolution was a fraction of what it was. And most of that's because, part of it's because of the resolution of the monitor and the pixels on that, but another part of it is just around that transmission speed from North Mildred just down to Market Street, okay? So it's very important. We also have networks that we share clinical information on so that providers outside of Cortez they're able to access information. The transmission speed's not quite as critical for that, but for any kind of radiological images and stuff like that, it's important. I want to finish by telling you a part of my prior life and where we're seeing healthcare go. Some of you know that I lived in Ada, Oklahoma prior to moving out here almost 3 years ago now. And I worked with a large ministry out of St. Louis that's Mercy Health. It's not affiliated with Mercy that's in Durango. Several projects I was invited to work on during my tenure with that organization. One of them was a telemedicine project where we designed and had built a hospital in the St. Louis metro area. It is a hospital that has no beds. It has no patients, no emergency room. It's an office building where physicians and nurses go to work every day and sit in front of computers, computer screens, computer terminals, and live connections with remote communities. That ministry based out of St. Louis operated in 4 states. Most of the people that were cared for by that health ministry were in very rural areas, like Tishomingo, Oklahoma. And you have no idea where that is other than it's the home of Blake Shelton. There's a hospital there that their average daily census is probably 2 people, but they have access to a plethora of clinical specialists all through telemedicine. And that's only possible with broadband. It's audio, they're visual, they're actually able to lay eyes on a patient and see a condition, able to communicate with other caregivers. Folks, we're in a rural area, and that is the next quantum step that we will see in healthcare will be on a telemedicine platform, simply because the unavailability of clinicians in very specialized areas that we simply cannot get to a community of our size. And it's not a Cortez issue, it's a community size issue regardless of what state you're in. So, glad to share.
Thank you very much. Karen, we think we have it solved.
Oh,
you want to try it?
Well, then let's do it quick while it's still working.
Well, we hope.
No, you ended up see.
Colorado is always mentioned at or near the top of any list when it comes to providing the talent and skill needed for successful business ventures. Leaders in Colorado want to compete nationally for high-paying jobs of all kinds. But for many living in Colorado, it simply isn't a fair competition, and many can't even get in the game.
If we laid asphalt like we lay broadband, then the Front Range in Denver would have, all their highways would be 2-3 feet thick, and you'd get out of Castle Rock and drop down to a single track dirt road. And that's kind of what we have in Cortez, right, at least from the private standpoint. I think that we found that most of the large incumbents have relied on their copper infrastructure and maybe to a lesser extent on cable, but we really haven't seen any investment in fiber. We have maybe 25% of people in Montezuma County that work from home, and so the ability for them to do their work out of their home is paramount to their quality of life and in their economic sustainability. And then we have larger companies like Osprey that are literally global companies that are trying to operate out of Cortez as well.
Well, Osprey was not located in Cortez in southwest Colorado because of its technology base. It had many other drivers. It was located there primarily to be close to the mountains, close to the canyons and mountains where we designed and used our product, but principally because we built our product for many years in southwest Colorado when we tapped into the Native American sewing skill base that was there. So it so happened that we had an economic reason to be in southwest Colorado, but of course we were running a real business as well. One thing that we simply had to have was strong internet access, fast speeds to support the growing technology requirements of the company. Osprey and Cortez worked hand in hand in developing their internet access and internet speeds, and I have to say we were a driver. We pushed it hard, but I compliment Cortez for being a strong receiver of the message and themselves making a commitment to expanding internet access and internet speeds. We had a lot of trenching going on in those days, but in return for that we had great internet access, or at least it was growing over time, and demonstrating to ourselves and the city that that investment was paying off, because we were growing, we were paying more taxes, we were hiring more people, and it was all because we were creating great product, but we had an operational platform behind it that could receive, store, and ship product and take orders, and all of that demands a strong technology platform, including fast internet access.
Broadband, access to the internet and all it offers, is more than just a tool for economic development. It's simply become a necessity these days for people, community services, and education.
They were really hurting in the Plains section of our state as far as high costs per meg and little to no service because they couldn't afford what they needed. They don't have the service into town. The telco just doesn't simply have enough line into town to turn up the speeds that's needed by the districts. They can't test. They can't all watch the same video at the same time. They can't all use the same applications all at the same time. They have to schedule how and when they can use those internet-based services. Or they simply just don't use them because they don't work. We were a large enough consortium that we were able to bring in a vendor who didn't have a shop set up in Colorado at all. They came from the East Coast. They can purchase the services from the same provider the incumbent provider, put their services on top of it, which is what I'm seeing as a consumer, and deliver it cheaper than the incumbent is willing to deliver it themselves.
Just as there wasn't a business case to be made for electric companies in the 1920s and 30s, in which electric companies refused to build the necessary power lines to provide sufficient electric services to rural areas, we now see broadband providers making similar claims that costs are too high and deployment too difficult to reach rural Colorado.
We provide high-quality care to a very large demographic area that has a very small population. The population is aging. As we try to get out to see them so that they don't have to come see us, telehealth becomes even more important. I'm not a clinician. I don't provide patient care, so the only way that I can help the community is to provide them with the technology that would give them access to health care that they would otherwise have to travel long distances, pay exponentially higher costs, speak to people that they've haven't been speaking to their entire lives. I've had some very, very heated discussions not only with the incumbents, but with other internet service providers that are chomping at the bit to get in and help us, but otherwise can't afford it, aren't allowed to do it, or have too many obstacles to make it worthwhile on their end. The only way that I was able to get that answer was to actually reach out to a state legislator to have them start having this conversation for me. The incumbent would not speak to me after a couple of conversations trying to get an explanation as to why they're unable to do something that is pretty much standard practice anywhere else across the country. Just because we're rural, I don't think that means that we should be able to be taken advantage of. The word fair doesn't even compute in this point. It's just the right thing to do. And if you're unwilling to do it, then leave and let somebody else come in and help us. Or let us help ourselves.
In the 1900s, it was government that had to step in to get the lines built with the Rural Electrification Act of 1936. Government was a successful part of the solution. Today in Colorado, many believe government needs to have the opportunity to be part of the broadband solution in our state. But outdated, obstructive legislation and a vocal lobbying effort by the telecom industry continue to put Colorado further behind, preventing even public-private partnerships. and stagnating our ability to compete and provide some of the basic needs and services most states enjoy. The time is now for state and local government to be part of the solution.
Well, we have the technology, but sometimes it takes that little extra bit of human ingenuity in order to make it work. Thanks a lot, Bill. And
Yay.
Yeah, appreciate that. All right. Cheryl Bean is here from Renew, and she's going to talk to you about, she's just recently had her service improved, and she's going to talk to you about that and the importance to the nonprofit organization that she leads.
Hi, I am Cheryl Bean. I'm with Renew. We are the domestic violence, sexual assault nonprofit crisis agency that serves Montezuma and Dolores County. And we did just last week switch from our slow internet provider to broadband, and it has been phenomenal. We used to have what we called the 3:30 slowdown. You could always tell when school got out because the internet just went. And we knew the school was out at that time. The internet, the gaming systems were coming on, and we'd start cleaning our desks up and get ready to go home. And I'd take my laptop and I'd go home to my really slow laptop out in the county and start working out there. Since then, we have not had the 3:30 slowdown. We were playing the other day. We had all three of our computers in the office that run all the time. We put webinars up on them. And then we took 3 laptops, because we also run a safe house. So we took 3 laptops to our safe house and we fired them up. And we didn't slow down. And we were able to watch all of it without digitizing, without slowdown, without that creepy little circle that goes around and around and around. I think we all know what that one is. One of the things that's really important to us is in our business, we have to stay very confidential. We work with people whose lives are in danger, sometimes really severe. And sometimes the only contact we have with them is on the phone. And they're saying, where can I get this help? Where can I find services? Maybe they're not in our area. And so we've got a client on the phone, we've got an advocate sitting there at a computer typing in where they're at, where we can find services. And it's very nice to be able to pull those services up very quickly and not have to sit there and make conversation while the little circle goes around and the brain thinks, I hate that thing anymore. I don't ever want to see it again. It's going to save us a lot of money. Because of the move to broadband, we are also going to install a new phone system. Our pricing on that is going to save us over $200 a month. That is phenomenal when it comes to nonprofit and our fundraising and all those people that don't want to pay for all these services that are essential. We have 5 lines. One of them is a 24-hour crisis line. And when we can move this, and my bill last month was $417. My new bill will be about $3 under $200. I mean, that's huge. That's money right there. That's smart money. All of our funders are online. All the grants, these huge grants from the federal government are online now. I only have 2 grants, one from the Montezuma County Department of Social Services and one from Vail through the District Attorney's Office that aren't online. Everything else is online. All the reporting, all the financial requests, all the application process is all online. We also have a database that has over 5,000 victims in it. That's online, and that goes to another state, so it needs to be secure and it needs to be accessible to us, especially when we go and put in our data numbers, trying to do data input about all the services and work that we honor ourselves doing every day. And when that 3 o'clock slowdown happens and we can't do that, that doesn't save anybody money. like I said, our webinars are really smooth. With us being down here, known as the stepchild of Colorado, down here in the Southwest, I serve on many boards up in Denver around these issues, and I still get asked, Cortez, you mean New Mexico? No, we're in Colorado, close, but, and the fact that we are close to so many states. The only way cost effectively and feasibly that I can provide continuing education for our volunteer advocates and the staff is to provide distance learning through webinars, through online trainings. And to not be able to access those is frustrating. And I have staff turnover because they don't feel like they're going anywhere, they're not learning anything. So I think this is going to really help with staff retention. And I think I'm just in love with it already, so I don't know what else to say. Just thank you for listening.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We have 3 folks from C&G Healthcare Management, and you all just got yours upgraded too, I think, didn't you, fairly recently?
Yes.
Yeah. We have Carol Glover. Is it, you better raise your hand. Carol Glover, Lou Sanger, and Matthew Mitchell are here representing that organization.
So we're with C&G Healthcare. We manage 8 nursing homes across southern Colorado, all in rural areas. So as everyone's mentioned about the DSL, the slow internet, we have that issue in lots of areas that we're in. And being in healthcare, we have to pass medicine, we have to be able to give pills on time, communicate with the corporate office, be able to communicate with doctors. We get calls and complaints all the time from our buildings that we can't get fiber optics into, that we can't get broadband into because they have a dedicated line where we get like a whole 3 gigabytes, you know, which does nothing for us. So advancing the broadband to everybody will help us in the healthcare industry, also at home. You know, when we work from home, we're not supposed to, you know, but every one of us does. Like Lou was saying earlier, when her husband's watching Netflix, she can't work, you know, she's doing nothing, she's dead in the water. So getting the fiber optics or the broadbands put out, it will be a great deal, game changer for all of us. And as technology advances here, we're adding cameras, we're adding monitoring systems, all kinds of different stuff to our systems to help us manage these buildings better, take care of our old folks that we have. So the faster speed and the more reliability, and Cheryl had mentioned cost as well. One building we just upgraded telephones and broadband, we're paying $1,200 a month, and then we're down to like $600. You know, and that helps us where we can put money back into the building, also with employees, giving raises and all that. So it benefits everybody.
I'm just going to add to that. So our IT company, we don't have a local IT company that we use. We actually, all of our stuff is hosted back in Milwaukee, which then is a double backup to Colorado Springs. We use a company called VCPI. So everything that we're doing here is, you know, being sent back there. So we need the speed, the up speed and the down speed. We're a 24-hour facility, 7 days a week. Any given moment we'll take an admission or a discharge. So we need the speed of the internet so that we can be efficient in our jobs and be able to take care of our residents. On a side note, I am in the process, well, I'll just say we did just upgrade Vista Grande Inn. We were at 15, I think, and I think we just upgraded to 30 now. So that has been more efficient for our staff to be able to chart and whatnot. On a side note, I personally am getting ready to get fiber at my house just down the street on Empire, which I'm way excited. We had the fire in Durango, I think it was last year. We have a facility in Durango. It was crisis mode. One of the other nursing homes in the area, they had to do some emergency discharges out of there. I'm on my cell phone at my house. Cell phone service is terrible here. I can't connect my phone to my Wi-Fi because my Wi-Fi isn't strong enough in my house. So with me being able to get fiber in my house for when I'm going to be able to do my Wi-Fi calling, and I'll be able to assist our homes locally and the ones that are farther away whenever they need our assistance, because, you know, some of us are if we get a call at 11 o'clock at night and need to assist the nurses and whatnot, then that's what we do.
And then just to add to what Cheryl was talking about with, regulations and what we're required to do, it's definitely a benefit to have the faster service, but it's almost a requirement for us because we have to keep up with all the regulations, reporting requirements, software, and all of that requires faster service. So that's a part of it too.
All right, Osprey's international perspective, Jason. I love saying Osprey's international, and we have an international company in our little community.
How's everybody doing? Can you hear me okay? I'm Jason Strickland. I'm the IT director over at Osprey. Since we'll start out with the international perspective, one of the numbers we can throw out is we are a global company. We sell to approximately 70 countries throughout the world. As part of that, we actually have an office in Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam. One of the things that has made Osprey competitively and advantageous is we run all of our design, development, and we actually have part of our sales force out of the Vietnam office. They're roughly 12 hours apart, which means we run roughly a 24-hour business. We have to be on all the time. From a growth standpoint, one mantra I've learned over the years is dollars equals data. I've been with Osprey since 2001, and in that time I've seen approximately, from a revenue standpoint, a 40-fold increase in the size of the business. We have 90 employees here in Cortez, we have approximately 50 in Vietnam, and then we have 30 in our Ogden warehouse. Osprey, the headquarters here in Cortez, actually acts as the hub of all of that connectivity. So it is critical that we have high-speed internet, we have redundant internet, we have low latency, so all of our services work quickly and effectively. Right now we run nightly cloud backups, and if it honestly wasn't for having high-speed service, I don't think we could kick those off and finish them before the following morning. And that's critical for us to keep uptime, proper backups to the business. We got gigabit service back in 2016. Before that, I remember our creative team actually used to go home at night and download files from Dropbox from their home connection because they couldn't actually all do it in the office at the same time. So they would download files at night, come into work the next day, modify them, and then go home and upload them back to Vietnam the next night. So as you can imagine, that wasn't very effective. So having the high speed is really, it's literally our lifeline. It's critical. One of the things we're working on as a long-term strategic objective is how many of our services do we move into the cloud? That's something that's kind of coming inevitably for us, where we're going to put more and more of our services in the cloud. And then it becomes kind of the opposite side of the coin. A lot of the business is now out in the cloud, which could be a server in Nebraska, Kansas, San Francisco. But if we lose connectivity here, now half of our staff is offline. Finance, marketing, sales, we can't do business. So it's pretty much a requirement for us to continue to grow and be successful in the region. Part of this, one of the reasons I'm passionate about this and excited to be involved is, since I've been with the company in 2001, I've witnessed all of the changes. I witnessed the environmental change that caused us to have to close the factory. Then I was there when they closed the factory and moved all of that overseas. I was here when they had to move the warehouse, because we didn't have the resources we needed in the region. And in the case of building the new building, the owners of the company, Mike and Diane Fotenhauer, are absolutely committed to the region. I sat in those discussions where the conversation is, do we stay in Cortez? Do we keep the building here? And they're committed. So they've come to me as the head of IT, and they've tasked me with holding up that commitment to this area and being able to service the business as we grow. And so that's why it is absolutely critical for me and for Osprey and for what we can provide to the community that we have high-speed internet services. One of the things I hope that we can provide to Cortez is, with our success, we can hold that up as a model for any other business that wants to come here to say, you can be as successful as us. You'll have all the resources. You'll have all the opportunity to grow. So, you know, to me, that's where I'd like for us to be able to give back and just show that that success is available for any company that wants to come to this region. So, thank you.
Thank you. Juan Diego also works for Osprey, but he's here this evening to talk a little bit about broadband service to his home and what that's meant to him to be able to have that.
Yeah, so when I first moved to the area, that was one of my main concerns, is selecting where I was going to live, you know, really depended on what kind of internet access I was going to have. So initially I did move to Dolores because they actually offered better high-speed internet than Cortez, and I was really surprised about that. Over time, things improved in Cortez, so I eventually moved to Cortez, living within the city limits, and still that wasn't the same kind of access I was getting in Dolores. And unfortunately, I subscribed to CenturyLink, and I was tied into a contract for a year, so I was really also limited. Like, initially, I was just renting a place, so I was really limited on where I could move depending on where CenturyLink would be able to provide service. So eventually, that contract ended. I ended up buying property, and I was really surprised. It was just on the edge of town. I'm in the county, but it's just literally on the other side of the border of the city and the county. And same deal there. I was really surprised that I was not able to get a high-speed internet that I needed to do the type of work that I do. As they mentioned, I work for Osprey. I'm a systems administrator. So there's times where I'll need to remote in and do support work after hours, or even during the day if I wanted to work from home. And as well, on the side, I do contract work. So same applies, that I need to have that availability of high-speed internet. And so just recently, with the expansion of the fiber that they ran from the city complex to the new Osprey building, it actually ran right down the road, literally at the corner of where our property was. And in our area, a few of the business owners got together and we expanded off that fiber, and we were able to run it to our buildings, to our property. And so now I do have access to 100 megabytes of internet up and down, and it's been great. It's been a huge improvement. So that's one thing that a lot of people look for when they come to the area, is what kind of internet access am I going to have? And it's going to really attract people who want to have businesses, even if it's not a large business. Is a lot of businesses really depend on having high-speed internet, and if that can be a real discouragement, people moving here. Like I said, when I originally moved to the area, I moved to Dolores first because it wasn't available in Cortez. So being able to expand on that here is definitely going to help Cortez improve as far as the growth and attracting businesses to the area as well.
Thank you very much. All right, so we've tried to give you a little bit of background information to help you understand why it's important to different segments of our population. And at this point now, Miriam is going to share with you some of the challenges that we're facing because of where we live. I don't know whether you have all heard of the term digital divide, but there is such a thing, and it's to our disadvantage at this point. So, Miriam?
Can you all hear me? Got to get really close, I think. So we just heard a lot about all the benefits of broadband, and I'm going to be Miss Doom and Gloom and tell you all the reasons that we don't have it. So that'll be super fun. So in your little handout that you have, looks kind of like that, which you just got, and you have some nice bedtime reading now in case you have some insomnia. But in here there's a couple of paragraphs about some of the information of what we're going to talk about today, but also, and a glossary for the words that you might have heard, acronyms that you all hear, because it's technical and I don't want to confuse you too much. So I'm going to try to keep those down, but if you do have a question, it is in your glossary, more than likely. So there's a couple of challenges that we have. One of those is our topography. We live here because it's a beautiful area. We have mountains, we have canyons, we have rolling hills. All of that makes it really, really hard to build broadband networks. It's very challenging to try to trench through a rock or try to put in poles where it's public lands. So all of those, that makes it very challenging to build the infrastructure, just straight up actually bring in machines and put the infrastructure in the ground or in the air even. On top of that, we then have really low population density, which is also some of the reason that we live here. There's about, and I'm working on a regional perspective, so I can't speak only to Montezuma County, but on average, we have 6,500 square miles in the 5 counties, and that's Pagosa Springs to Utah and New Mexico to Silverton. And that gives us about 15.5 people per square mile, which is pretty low. Montezuma County and Dolores counties are even lower than that. Dolores County, I believe, has about 1 to 2 people per square mile. So you can imagine that it's very expensive for a business to come out and put in infrastructure when there's that few people and that few customers. And that's, so we have a lack of people, creates a lack of return on investment or an ROI for most private companies. So without those ROIs, the private companies tend not to build out in here. We have some local companies that have been really creative and very collaborative, but our incumbents, the large national companies, tend not to put in infrastructure here because of those low return on investments or non-existent return on investments. It cost about, what was it, like $6 million to build infrastructure to Silverton. There's less than 900 people in that entire county. They're never, ever going to credit a ROI on that. And then on top of that, we have long distances between communities. So we have population centers with Cortez, Mancos, Dolores, Dove Creek, but there's not a ton of people along the highways to create more customer base. So we have, 55 miles between here and Durango? 60-ish? Yeah. Not quite. So that's a long distance of infrastructure to put into the ground or to hang on poles that then it already has a low ROI, so now we're putting in more infrastructure and creates a continued downward spiral of that ROI. And then finally, well, I shouldn't say finally, but one of the other major issues is sort of a monopoly, I should say lack of options for us as consumers, or a monopoly on a market, if you will. Most of the incumbent providers have relied on copper and cable or coaxial, as you heard in the video from Shane. And there's very little desire to increase that infrastructure because, again, there's no ROI. I keep going back to the same thing. I sound like a broken record. Again, there's no ROI, and so they've already put in this infrastructure previously, and you're already getting some service, if you want to say that, at your couple of megs down. And it's hard to watch Netflix, so it's hard to do work, things like that. But since there is that lack of incentive for them, for an incumbent to put that infrastructure in, they don't do that. So we're then kind of left to figure out how to solve this on our own. Ultimately, like we talked about in the video, we need to think about our infrastructure like we did with telephone and electric and figure out how to solve those problems ourselves as a rural area and figure out how to invest in our issues, in our problems to solve our issues. And we've got some incumbents in the area that are doing that. It's just a matter of we need to make sure we get to all of our citizens. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Now our crystal ball.
Yes, pretty ominous to talk about the future, and I guess I can just make it up, and maybe I'll be right. We've heard from a lot of people who talked about why high-speed internet is important now, but I do think it's important to accentuate the point that I think that whatever our needs are today, they're going to only grow. You know, we haven't summited yet, we haven't peaked yet. Our need for this infrastructure is changing and evolving every day. I looked online, I tried to figure out how many jobs are being forecast over the next 20 years that really aren't around yet. Like I've got a 6 and a 9-year-old, and odds are pretty good they're going to work in a profession that doesn't even exist yet. But Google, when I was trying to do that search, instead of looking at the positive, how many jobs will be created based on technology, all I could really find is all the doom and gloom stuff, which is all the jobs that we're going to lose based on technology. So one study by Oxford University estimates that 47% of U.S. jobs will go away due to automation. Another report said that by 2030, 800 million jobs worldwide would be phased out. That was between 40 and 75 million in the U.S. Equally as alarming, a lot of these jobs are predicted to start to phase out in 2020. And so, you know, the future is now, right? I mean, it's already 2018, and we're already looking at, in the not too distant horizon between software and automation, a lot of jobs going away. So, you know, while we know that this isn't an exact science, you know, economic forecasting is really kind of a best guess. I think that it's certainly clear to me that as a local government and as county and state governments and the federal government, we need to make investments in this critical infrastructure now because, you know, change is coming. We also have a changing world with the Internet of Things. Some of you folks may have heard of that. Basically, the Internet of Things says anything with an on and off switch can be connected to the Internet and will in short order. So that could be your cell phone, your coffee maker, your washing machines, your headphones, your lamps, your dishwasher, all this stuff. Analysis online basically estimates that by 2020 there will be between 26 billion and 100 billion devices connected to the internet, which is a lot. I think the practical applications of having your toaster network to your car are a bit unclear. No? Yeah, thank you. Somebody's listening, thank you. But there are some real, yeah, it's critical if you like your toast a certain way, I think. But there are some really practical applications. I think that home security, I think that energy efficiency, and even just convenience, all these things are going to make sense. I'll share with you guys that I was meeting last week with a guy who's a solar contractor, and he was talking about the future of energy. And right now we have peak times of the day when we use the electrical load more. So in the morning, you know, 6 to 9 o'clock, we're using it a lot. At night, you know, in the evening, maybe 5 till 9 o'clock, we use it a lot. In the short term, in the next 5 years or so, electrical companies are probably going to start charging us for those peak times because they're paying the energy that they buy a peak, and so they're going to probably start charging us that way. And so it would make sense in the not so near future to program your water heater to maybe superheat your water at 4 in the morning so you're not paying that peak consumption. You know, a lot of mornings when I leave to work, I'll turn on the dishwasher so I have clean dishes when I get home, but in 5 years maybe I'll have an internet-enabled dishwasher that maybe starts at 10 or 11 because it doesn't really matter to me as long as the dishes are done when I get home. So there are practical applications to this for sure. From an economic development standpoint, I really view broadband, we talk about all the utilities, I really look at it more kind of like rail was 100 years ago. And so, you know, I don't want to pick on Osprey, but, you know, we know that they needed to move their distribution to Ogden a few years ago. The biggest reason, and there might have been other reasons, but I think the biggest reason they made that financial decision is because Ogden has rail. You know, and there's a significant financial benefit to them to doing it, and quite frankly, one that as a city or even the state of Colorado, we couldn't overcome that. And that's a financial investment that they made 100 years ago, and it's still paying benefits to Ogden and everybody who has that spur. And so I think that broadband over time is going to become that. In the short term, it's going to be a way to attract businesses to say, hey, come here, we have this. In the long term, I think it's just going to leave the communities in the dark. And if you don't have it, if you're not there and you haven't made those investments, I just think that you're going to look back and you're going to be a community in the dark ages. So quickly, what the city has done, our investments, right now we have a fiber to the business loop that connects about 250 businesses. We have a government network, and so that's a completely separate network that connects up the hospital district, all the county offices, the city offices, the school district, and so we operate that network. And then we are also, because of Department of Local Affairs grant, putting $1 million in fiber in through the end of 2017 and into 2018. And broadly, what that's going to do is get a little bit of a ring of fiber around the city. We'll get some fiber to our edges. It's really called a middle mile investment. And so we're really trying to kind of build that backbone. And then finally, really our goal is to just kind of get fiber to the home. I think we still think it's a not only a quality of life issue, but 25% of Montezuma County businesses are home-based businesses. So that's, well, I'm sorry, I said that wrong. 25% of homes in the county are home-based businesses. So I think there is a big economic development case to make sure that we have, well, we heard Warren talk about it. We heard Juan Diego talk about, doing his consulting from home, and we have a lot of places like this. So anyway, we're doing a study to just see what is our feasibility. Not only what is the cost to get fiber to the home, but is there a business model that'll work for the city? Because like Miriam said, it's, a lot of times from the city standpoint, it feels a little bit altruistic. We put the fiber in, but there's not a big amount of money that comes back to us. So really figuring out that business case. So that's what I've got.
Okay. All right, so this is your turn now. I hope that this has raised some questions in your mind, and this is your opportunity to be able to ask. So if you want to, just in order for us to be able to hear, if you want to come up to the podium and share your questions or your concerns.
Hi, my name's Janalee Miller from Dolores, and I know that there was Colorado Senate Bill 152 that prohibited county and civic governments from working and engaging in partnerships to establish end-user broadband, and Montezuma County opted out of that. I'm assuming Cortez did as well.
Well, actually, the city was had fiber built prior to 152, so we were grandfathered. Right. So we haven't opted out of 152, but the towns of Dolores, Mancos, and Montezuma County have all successfully opted out.
Right. So that means that now we are wide open for civic governments to work with private partnerships, and this will overcome some of that ROI stuff you were talking about. And I just wondered, where are we at right now as far as that goes? I know last year there was some banter about a sales tax that the county commissioners weren't really happy about for broadband. And so I just wonder, where are we now in terms of, obviously everybody wants it, it is a utility, and so where are we at with the public-private partnerships and the funding, and specifically perhaps the idea of sales tax, or just, kind of where are we at with how are we going to make this happen?
Sure. And I'm afraid I have to answer that. So the part of it, so we were working with a big consortium. We had Mancos and Dolores and Montezuma County and some private folks, and this group called Connect 4. And honestly, just as a group, I think that because it's so complicated and there's so many moving parts, it felt like we just hit a little bit of a brick wall. So, we haven't met as a group, but I wouldn't say that idea is over. I think that the big stumbling block we hit, and it's one that we've hit as a city many times, is just the finances. I think that the cost, when we were meeting as a group, and we thought this is something that we should figure out for the community because it's important, and then we get preliminary estimates of $40 million to do that, I think it put everybody in shock. It wasn't just the county. I think everybody was a little bit in shock of this investment. So that effort may start again. I wouldn't say it's gone away. It's just we've been in hiatus. So in the interim, the city is doing right now with Finley Engineering and HR Green, we're just doing our own feasibility study to see what it would take to build that in the city. And certainly when we look at those models, those are everything from public-private partnerships to private only to public only. So we're going to look at all those models. In your honor, do you have anything you want to add?
I was just going to say, I think that it's disappointing as it was for those of us that served on the Connect Forward committee, I guess we could call it. It started the conversation. It gave us a chance to sit down with people from a coming from different perspectives. And it gave us a chance to begin to kind of think and talk about some of these kinds of things. SB 152, we got that little hurdle out of the way, and I think that probably was something that came about because of the work that we had done with Connect 4. Part of this is an education component, and I think that probably what we're going to have to do is figure out a hybrid way of being able to move forward on this. It can't just be private business any longer, because especially for those of us that live in areas where, as Miriam kept telling us, there's no return on the investment or such small return that they're just not interested. They can go to Denver or other places with much higher populations and get a much better return on their investment. But the problem is we need it here, and we needed it yesterday. And so I think the fact that we did form a group, we did have lots of conversations. Yes, we did run into some obstacles that kind of slowed the process down. But you have to start the conversation before you can begin to move forward and come up with a solution. And so I think that Connect 4 started that conversation. You guys are a continuation of that conversation, and depending upon what happens when we get the results from the city's feasibility study, that will certainly give Cortez a little bit of direction. And I think if any of the entities in the county can kind of figure out a way to be able to move it forward for themselves, it helps all of us. And I, for one, as a city representative, would love to see us be able to continue to work, not just in isolation, but with the bigger picture. Because the truth is that just having good broadband in Cortez, we don't have enough room for all the people that we would like to see come and set up businesses. And a lot of them are going to want to live in the county, or live in Mancos, or live in Dolores. And so if we can find a way for us to all work together to make this happen in our county, then it's going to be advantageous for all of us.
My name's Greg Kemp. I live in Mancos. The film that we saw referred to the model bringing electricity to rural areas in the 30s, and on up into the early 50s, by means of co-ops. What little I know about that indicated that the federal government loaned startup money to these co-ops, who then created the infrastructure necessary, and over time those loans were repaid, and we now have what we can't live without, electricity. Is there any model or mechanism for doing the same thing in providing high-speed internet service? Because certainly we're not unique in being without it. Rural areas throughout the country are without it. And that co-op model worked pretty well for electricity and even for telephone service, because the big companies, as you pointed out, did not have the return on investment and would not bring electricity to rural areas. So we're faced with the same situation again. Will the same model work? And if so, how do we develop it? Does it take a legal mechanism first to do that, and then seek the initial capital investment that will be paid back eventually?
I can try to answer some of that. As it stands, there is no development of co-ops in Colorado that I know of. Some of the electric co-ops in the state are working on broadband development, like Delta Montrose Electric Association. However, there is some federal and some state funding for private companies to build out into hard-to-serve areas. One of that is called the Connect for America Fund, and there's been a couple of rounds of funding. That's through the FCC, and it goes to private companies, and in Colorado that went to CenturyLink to build out infrastructure in the hard-to-serve or the unserved and underserved areas. That funding had requirements of speeds of 10 megabits down and 1 megabit up. Even though that's not technically the definition of broadband, that's what the speeds were in that funding source because it came out prior to the FCC changing those definitions. So there's been 2 rounds of that, and CenturyLink gets something like, what, $20 million? A
lot more. I think like
per year for 5 years.
I think it was like 200, 250 million. Do you remember, Rick, what the CAF 2 was?
It's, how about this, a ridiculously large amount of money. Yeah.
Yeah, so it was like 250 million, right? I mean, it's something.
Yeah. And that's to connect the areas that are hard to serve. CenturyLink is using DSL technology in most places to do that. Then the state side.
That's very slow service. That's
which is your copper phone lines. I didn't define DSL, but it's I think the phrase is darn slow lines that I like to use. And then in the state, in 2014, the state had some legislation that created a broadband high-cost mechanism, which is basically a broadband fund for the private companies to apply for funding to help offset their costs here in Colorado in the hard-to-serve areas. And in the region, we've had 2 successful grants this last go-round. One was to serve the Cascade Village area of San Juan County, and one is to serve an area between Pagosa Springs and Durango in Plata County, of a neighborhood there. And last year, the broadband high-cost mechanism had about $9 million worth of funding to provide this across the state. They had about $18 million worth of requests. So there's an obvious need.
Well, and the way that works too is that those are state dollars, but what's happened is that a lot of those are public-private partnerships. Mm-hmm. That's where the government has gone in and they have said that we feel that this is important enough that for our citizens in our community, so this is what we'll provide or this is what we'll do. And I know for DMEA, in the Montrose area, they were able to get a grant as well, and it was a partnership with including their electric company. And so what it does is it stretches those limited grant fund dollars and brings in a variety of partners. So it's not just a private business. Government's allowed to come in and provide what it can provide and what it can do well. I think sometimes if you were to listen to some of the large providers, you would think that government can't do anything well and you just need to step back and let private enterprise take care of it. But the problem has been is that private enterprise can't afford to take care of this. And so we need to have some kind of a partnership where we can bring a variety of players into the mix. And of course the problem is, to answer your question, Greg, is that it all boils down to money. When there are $18 million worth of projects and there's only 9 million, why obviously it's kind of slow going. But I think there are lots of creative people out there, and one of the big advantages of bringing government in is that government doesn't have a profit incentive. All we have to do is be able to pay for what it costs for us to provide something. And so if we can be part of that partnership, then we may be able to bring something to the table because we don't have to have the profit that a company has to have. And so that cuts down the initial cost of getting it in place. It's the infrastructure that costs so much and that we need to provide. So did that answer your question?
Well, I'm sure that's the best you can do at this point.
No, I think the only thing I would add is that, so you talked about kind of a co-op model. I'll tell you with Connect 4, one thing we looked at pretty early on was doing more of an authority, like a broadband authority. But it looked like legally we could do that, but there wasn't really a model out there for us. So it just got a little bit, there wasn't a high comfort level doing that with everybody in the group just because it was undefined. You know, a lot of authorities, like if you look at a 911 authority or a dispatch authority, there's a lot of ways that governments work together to form an authority and address a wide need with a lot of bodies. But that's not true with the broadband authority. And so it just hasn't been a model that anybody has used. So like I said, it looked like it would be legal for us to do that. I think it's still something we could pursue, but it did come with quite a few questions as well because it wasn't really, you know, we couldn't find another entity doing that.
Anybody else?
So Max Doyle, I work for the Carl Hamlin Congress campaign. I guess my question, as Priscilla, I mean, it sounds to me as if this is a problem that is not going to, private enterprise probably isn't going to stay the day here. And from a federal perspective, what is it?
Well, and I'm sorry, but one thing, because I think people here can hear you, but we're live streaming this right now and we're recording it. So just for the, I'm sure the thousands of people at home watching this right now, they have no idea.
Yes, thousands.
They have internet. Yes. Anyway, let me start over. It sounded to me, Max Doyle, Carl Hanlon for Congress campaign, from what you described, it sounded like private enterprise is not going to come save the day, you know, due to the ROI constraints of a rural area, and that's just a grave reality that we face. We can try to find ways to fix that. I heard a description of a couple of programs that exist that sound like they either don't provide broadband that is actually either don't provide broadband at all, or you know the funding is scarce. From a federal perspective, you know, I mean, if there was a program that you guys could just be like, man, cool, this makes sense for us as a rural community. I mean, what is that? And you know, don't just be like pour money on me. Is there an answer that you guys have that you would like a representative to champion for you?
You know, I hope this isn't out of place here, and you can slap me if you want to. I think a big part of the problem is that we've got so many lobbyists in Washington, D.C. that represent the big telecom companies, and they suck up every dollar that Congress allocates. And so what happens then is that, you know, if you have a small rural community that needs a few $1 million in order to be able to move forward, well, there aren't very many funds available because CenturyLink and some of the others have really got a stranglehold on these funds. And, you know, they're not, I kind of look at it as a dog in the manger sort of attitude. We don't want to come and do it for your community because it doesn't fit into our business model. Okay, that's fine, I get that. But we don't want anybody else to come in and do it either, because they may take some dollars that we would like to have. And you know, it's one of those situations where all of you guys are paying in order for CenturyLink and the other big telecoms to be able to provide high-speed internet to Denver or to Philadelphia or to Phoenix or San Francisco or all of those other places. And then there's not that much money left to be able to provide the service here. And the sad thing is that because of the topography and the population, it is more expensive to do it here. But does that mean that we are less deserving or have less of a need? And until we can get our legislators to understand that there are other voices out there, right now, the lobbyists are the loudest voice in the room. So.
Right, and I would just say two specifically. One is, Miriam mentioned the Connect America funds, and right now those are really just the large tier providers that can apply for those. And so I think that's more of what the mayor was saying, is that there's these big pots of money for broadband deployment, but only the huge players can avail themselves to that. And then the second thing is, when we've even looked at like the USDA, on its face, these funds look pretty good, and then when you dig into them, you find, no, you need to be an electrical co-op to apply for them, or, geez, no, you've already got an incumbent provider that nobody's heard of within 1,000 miles, so you can't apply for them. So there's so many strings attached and so many little snares. So I think sometimes, Congress may be, and I'll say sometimes Congress may be well-intentioned. I don't believe that often it is, and I'm sorry, but even with these programs, these federal programs, there's so much oversight and so many strings attached to this money, and it gets so specific that, it seems like it was really written for one or two places that could avail themselves to it, and nobody else can. So I'd say look at
by those places.
Right, exactly. So yeah, exactly. I'm sure some congressman's district. So we just want to be that congressman's district, I guess. Just make sure the money can come here, and not really. So those would be two specific things that it'd be nice to look at.
And I'm gonna piggyback on this a little bit as well, that there is no funding at the federal level that is specifically earmarked for any local government to build out infrastructure, for broadband infrastructure. There's the CAF2 funding, the Connect for America funds. Those were geared for very large incumbent providers, in the way in which the legislation or the funding was written. There was one policy or clause in there that any provider had to use like one of 15 banks that they identified. So local small providers that we have here might use a local bank, and likely do. They were not eligible. There are several other funding sources. One is the educational rate, or E-rate, and that's to help offset the cost of K through 12 and libraries, just their per meg costs, to help them with their bottom line. That doesn't necessarily, it can build out some infrastructure, but it's not necessarily geared for that. And the funding actually goes to the ISPs and to help offset the cost, to make that differential even for everybody. The other one is rural healthcare, and that will build out infrastructure, but that is, and these are all through the FCC, through a variety of their programs, and that will help build out infrastructure, but it has to go, the ownership is the rural healthcare providers. So, because that's a closed HIPAA network. So that means that it's really hard for the city or the county to utilize that infrastructure unless we kind of massage that program a little bit. And then I just completely lost. Oh, one of the other ones is the rural USDA, that's rural development, and USDA is the U.S. Department of Ag. And their funding is for unserved areas. So if you have a cell phone in that area that works, you're considered served. And it doesn't even have to work all that often.
Just once in a while.
Just once in a while. So the way in which we find out if an area is served or not is by census block. And well, we don't have a lot of people out here, so our census blocks are really big. So what happens is that an incumbent provider will send a signal in the middle of the night to find, to ping, if you will, the somebody's house or residence or business somewhere, an address in that census block. They'll get that 25 by 3 or 100 by 4 or whatever it is they're reporting, and then they'll report that to the FCC, and that's considered served. We don't have any mechanism on our end to figure out if an area is actually served or not in a way in which the FCC and the ISPs will accept. So there's a lot of policy issues. It's not just cash. If we had cash, we could do it, but there's a lot of policy issues that prevent us from having cash to be able to fix our own problems.
Yes. Failure of implementation. Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
Hi, I'm Ray Williamson. It's an interesting discussion. Unfortunately, I had another meeting, so I came in a little late. And this may have been covered, but what is the city doing with the county administration about trying to address this issue? Is there any discussion with our county commissioners and their staffs on the issue of providing broadband? Because I mean, it's clearly at least a county-wide problem. I'm delighted that the city has taken the steps it has taken so far. That doesn't help me when I'm just outside the city limits.
Right, and so Mr. Williamson, thank you. And we did just have a lady at kind of the start of the Q&A ask a similar question. So for the sake of the audience, I'll try to auctioneer my answer. So check me, Larry Don, that you're right. So the city and the county were working together for about 18 months in a group called Connect 4 that had the city, the county, both the towns, Mancos and Dolores, all representing, as well as some private, just interested individuals. And
the tribe as well.
oh yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, thank you. The Ute Mountain Ute tribe as well. So we all met, and you know, I think that what set us back is when we got our preliminary engineering report and saw that it would be around $40 million to deploy countywide. You know, the discussion of funding and how to pay for that and what to do, I think it set the group off into a couple different other explorations. You know, we looked at different public-private partnerships, and really, the group, as a group, we could never settle on what that would look like. And we talked about a couple other models. So I'll tell you, we're still in loose conversations with them, but I tell you right now, we're not actively working with the county on that. But I think it's something that we could, following the city's current feasibility study, and once we determine if there is a fiber to the home business model that actually works for us, you know, it's a public document. I mean, I think that if we can figure out something to kind of get the ball rolling, I think that'll push out into the county as well. I also would tell you that the fiber that we're laying this year, as best as we can, we're trying to get that to all of our boundaries. And so anything that happens in the county, I mean, we really did think, okay, how can we best spend this money to where it not only serves our citizens, but would really lend itself to any project that Connect 4 took on. And so, you know, we were really deliberate and intentional with that project as well. So, you know, I think there's a ray of light, but I can't tell you right now, we're not actively meeting with administration and talking about it. I think that at least the last discussions kind of ran its course for the time being. And
I think the hope is still there to be able to come up with some kind of a way to be able to move forward. It is more than just as a single entity, but we haven't figured that out yet. So it's not dead, it's just resting.
Yeah, I tell you, my concern as somebody who has had the advantage in the past of very high-speed internet and being able to pursue my work over the years is that this county, the city and the county and the surrounding municipalities are falling further and further and further and further behind.
You're right.
And I feel it every day when I have trouble downloading important files that I need, and I'm sure a number of other people in this room do. I just think it's extremely important, a high priority for the county and the city, both. And I really don't see that there's been enough effort put into it, honestly.
You know what I think part of what's going to have to happen is we're going to have a groundswell movement where people like you step up to their government, whether it's the county government or the city government, and say, we have to have this. This isn't a luxury anymore. It is a utility, and we want you to find a way to finance this, and we are willing to pay for it. Now, I honestly believe that if we have that, and those of us that are in government realize that if we show you a plan and help you to see a way forward in this, that if the citizens of this community, the entire county, not just Cortez or Dolores or Memphis, that we as citizens feel this is important enough that we have your back too, that we can get something done. So talk to your neighbors. You know, a lot of this becomes word of mouth. I can as a city representative, and Shane can as a government staff member, we can talk about this and talk about this and talk about this. We drank the Kool-Aid. We believe this is important. All the people that are sitting up here now see the value of this. We need some more support so we can move forward on this. So help us with that. And I, for one, am willing and able to take a leadership role. I know Shane is. So give us some rein and let us do it. I've got 2 years left on council. Larry Don's got 2 years left on the commission. You help us. We're willing to take you to the finish line, but we got to have something to go on, because neither one of us can do. Our governmental entities can't alone afford to be able to fund this. So let's figure out a way that we can all chip in and do it.
And on that, we can't afford to figure out how to do it by ourselves. I'd say talk to your federal and your state elected officials as well, because there's going to need to be some funding from both of those to figure this out.
And pay attention to the legislation that's going on. Do not let your state or your federal legislators put laws into effect that wind up saddling us with less desirable service than what we want. There's a piece of legislation at the state level right now. The FCC has said that internet service is 25 down and 5 up.
3. 25, 3
up. Okay, it's 25 down and 3 up. Well, for those of you that have more than that, you already know that that's minimal service. We've got a bill before our state legislature now that is willing to lock us into 10 down and 1 up. Well, you know what? Let's not legislate something that is going to keep us in the dark ages. I mean, my gosh. So, but you have to keep on top of this kind of stuff, and you have to make yourself heard. The only way those guys in Denver or in Washington D.C. are going to stop doing some of this kind of stuff is for you guys to call them and say, you know what? You're coming up for re-election pretty soon, and if you sponsor this bill or don't sponsor something, we're bringing you home. And then do it. I think we have more power than we realize we have.
Well, and Your Honor, I'd just add that a lot of the legislators that I saw that were saying that basically 10 down, 1 up is good enough, they were calling it, you know, people want a Cadillac, but this is a Ford or Chevy, whatever stupid analogy they used. But these people live on the Front Range, and they're getting 100 meg synchronous, you know, so they're calling it a Cadillac service where they're getting speeds that are infinitely better than we're getting here. And I think once again, you know, the rural areas are getting kind of left out, and the private providers have done it on the Front Range because there's just so many people there. You know, they have such a good return on investment, and there's just not that incentive here. And honestly, from my standpoint, I would be happy to have incumbent providers come in and provide it to people. I can tell you the city, I've got no interest to be in this business. You know, I think I'd rather focus on potholes and controversial stop signs on Montezuma or whatever we're doing. But the reason why we've talked about this and we've worked on this for so many years is because there is nobody coming in on a white horse to save us, right? The private providers aren't coming in. And I think you're right, sir. I think we are getting left behind. And if we don't make that investment now, if we don't figure out a way as a community to solve the issue, I think we are going to be that town without, you know, that rail spur, but it's going to be the internet highway that we're missing. And I think it'll be the financial downfalls from not having that are going to be equally as burdensome to the community.
For any of you that want more information on that state legislation that the mayor referred to, my email is on the bottom of the handout. and I'm happy to provide you with that information. The Senate bill is SB 18-002, and I'm happy to have a conversation anytime you want.
Miriam knows a lot about it, and she's good at explaining. So if you have other questions, a little more technical, I know she'd be happy to. Are there any other questions? In that case, I would like to close. I'd like to have a few words in closing. Yeah, you yes.
Well, I'm Larry Don Sukla, and I'm a Montezuma County Commissioner. And I would just like to say that the current board of Montezuma County Commissioners are 100% behind broadband. We believe that it is the future. You can't even run in one of these new tractors. If you kill it out in the field, you can't turn the dang thing on unless they turn it on for you back in Kansas somewhere. So as an ag-based community, we understand how important it is, and we would really like to work with the city. I believe that we are just stalled a little bit, but the writing is not on the wall that the partnership has fell apart. The problem is the venue. So everybody makes excuses. There is a way forward. There's various venues. So Rio Blanco County up in Meeker, Colorado, they have sent fiber to every home. Now they're actually more rural than Montezuma County, and I believe they have 2,000 residents versus 26,000. The way that they did it is they spent $5 million of their reserves, and they spent $7 million through grants, DOLA grants, as the city manager was talking earlier, and that's how they did it. So there is a way forward. When the Montezuma County Board of Commissioners held public meetings, and suggested that we would like to do a sales tax for $39 million. Thank God I can outrun the other two commissioners, because they were very upset. The taxpayers, a lot of them did not want to move forward with that. That doesn't mean that that's still something that is off the table. It's just, as we have been working on this, we have found other venues. As she was talking about earlier, you know, the electric company in Montrose, they're going to spend $90 million to run the fiber. So our electric company got burnt here years ago. Commissioner Lambert could speak on this. And they are very reluctant to move forward our co-op electric company. So that's where, if we was to go that venue, go to those electric co-op meetings and raise some cane, that how important that the broadband is. Another venue that has been brought up has not been talked about, but it's one of the most successful ones in the country, and it has to do with a county in Oregon. And what this is the key. It's the take rate. How many people it is that will sign up to do it. So this is how they figured it out. They went to their local high school. They created a class, an economic class, a year-long class in their high school, and they partnered with a private company. The high school students sell the broadband packages. In return, the high school gets 10% of the profits with this forever. Well, think about it. They got every parent is going to switch, and they're going to go with this private company because they want to buy from a high school. They're also taxpayers at the high school, so they're help paying for the funding for their children, so they're help paying for their high school. I would love, and I'll commit as a commissioner, it takes 3, but I would commit if we send the right person back to Oregon. I've been there, but somebody else needs to see it. I would help fund sending the right person back there to go look at this model, and where we could move forward maybe with this model. Because I believe so far of all the models that I have heard about, this might be the one that takes off, where you start an economic class with your high school and have those kids go out and sell the internet.
Anybody else with a question or a comment? James? Okay. Okay. Several years ago, I went to my first broadband conference, and one of the presenters used this Greek proverb, which has stuck with me ever since. It's a society grows great when old men plant trees whose shade they know they will never sit in. I love this quotation because to me, it beautifully and succinctly states what I believe is one of the most important jobs of government. And that is to look toward the future and to plan for that future. I hope, if you don't leave with anything else this evening, I hope that you've left with a better understanding of the importance of this infrastructure to our community. And it's not just for us. I look around this room, and there are a lot of people in this room that are my age or just a little younger. Probably the limited service that I have is going to probably be okay for me. But it's not going to be okay for our kids. We had 3 high school students here this evening. They were telling us what they use because they have access to high-speed internet. Ever since I've lived in this community, we moved here in 1975, I have heard we want our kids to be able to come home. We want to be able to provide them with jobs so that if they want to come back, they can. This gives us the chance to be able to do that. This is our moment. I think that this community is on the threshold of some really wonderful things. And I think that because of this developing technology and what it can allow us to do, that this will give us the chance to be able to realize some of those things. I think the time is now. I think you've got some people that are in government right now that see the importance of this. We've got many people that are running for government, and we need to move forward. So as you go home and mull over this evening, I hope that it will be more than just thinking about what you heard this evening, but that you'll take it to the next step, that you'll talk to the people that are running for your local government and tell them how important you think this is, that you will contact your state representatives, that you will take it a step further and contact your federal representatives, and then start pushing for this. I think that if we work together, we can make this happen. But it's going to be a joint effort, and it's going to be up to us. So thank you so much again for coming. For those of you that were community members and presenters, thank you. Thanks.
So how long does that take?
We're going to do surgery.